Okay, right now I've got a bad stream on YouTube. I've got, it says it's very, very bad. Let's see. Working out some technical difficulties here. Twitch seems to be working.
Facebook's working.
Oh, it is?
I got a notification.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let me see it then. Let me see it.
I see it.
How does it sound? YouTube is saying it's terrible.
I don't know. I can still say it.
It still says it's bad.
Sounds fine. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, lords and ladies, we're starting a new podcast, and we're resurrecting an old one. Reverse Redaction. Me and Judah last year, we did a podcast called Reverse Redaction. And Judah helped me get out of my shell, get back on the internet a little bit. And so now we're diving in simultaneously into 3 broadcasting platforms out of the blue. So we're just, this is a test run today just to see how things work and see if everything's actually working. So if you're on YouTube or Twitch or Facebook, let us know how the signal quality is.
Testes. 1, 2, 3.
Testes. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Allison, for tuning in. Appreciate it. Thank you for the check, sound check there. So, yeah, like I said, last year, Judah and I, we did a podcast called Reverse Redaction, and the point of that podcast was looking at mainly movies, but culture, all sorts of stuff, and finding just interesting things to talk about. And in a way, I kind of like to think of it like we were almost using it as a springboard to conversation. Would that be a good way to characterize it?
Perfect.
Yes, this is live. Thank you for tuning in. We're live. We're live. So eventually, what our goal here is to figure out a format that'll work for the Surfing Violinist podcast. I actually started the Surfing Violinist podcast before we did Reverse Redaction, but I was in a very bad place emotionally and mental health-wise. So, yeah, it lasted, I think, 3 episodes or something like that, and I gave up. So, yeah, in this podcast, the mission statement, I'll go ahead and say what the mission statement is. It's, I've written so much stuff, I'm going to have a hard time finding it. All right. Learning to dance towards resilient, robust, and independent integrity. So, big words, and over the course of the next few months, we'll be teasing out what I mean by that. Basically, the surfing violinist, it's the anti-specialization idea. So, I'm joined by Judah McNeil in Chicago, Illinois. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. I don't know. Can everybody hear me? I mean, how do you have it hooked up?
I'm hearing you, and I've got the video. Yeah, you're out of shot now.
Okay, yeah. I just checked myself on Facebook. This is a weird world we live in. Technically, with technology, I can hear myself check in. That's interesting. Oh, and now I'm videoed.
Yeah, so I will probably go back and forth because there's times I'm going to have this really long monologue in this podcast. It's going to be more of a discussion podcast in Reverse Redaction, which we're relaunching today as well. Reverse Redaction. Yeah. We'll be back in the thick of it.
That was my only contention. We could do this monologue thing of yours where I'm forced to listen as long as I can do Reverse Redaction.
That's right. So, okay, so I have a little intro. So every one of these podcasts, I'm going to do a little intro monologue. And eventually we'll get to the point where I have music and all kinds of cool stuff, but it's a little bit complicated as it is trying to be my own live editor. So we're doing that. All right, so I'm going to read something I've written, and this kind of gets at, I wrote this the other morning, and I think in our community, at least, we've been hit by a hurricane at the end of 2018, October 2018. The strongest storm to hit the continental United States since 1992, Hurricane Andrew. So Hurricane Michael hit us in October 10th of 2018, a Category 5 upon landfall. They finally redacted that, actually, Judah, because originally they thought it was a 4, but through all the extra, tests and stuff they did, and looking at the numbers, they decided it was a Category 5 after all. So these last 6-7 months have been interesting. And what I'm about to describe right now, I think kind of gets at some of what I've felt. Are we still on Facebook?
Yep.
It's weird. I can't see it. Hello. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yo, Sebastian, how you doing? Okay, so this is my thought for the day. And again, once we get into the swing of things, I'm gonna have cool music playing and stuff behind this. It's gonna be real epic. All right. So here's the thought for the day. Rest assured, at some point or another, you're gonna find yourself backed into a wall by an unstoppable force. You have a choice. Now, traditionally, the choice was an either or, fight or flight, but those aren't the only two choices. You can cower, you can cheat, you can try to talk your way out, you can go berserk and hope that some desperate last-ditch attempt to turn into the Hulk will miraculously make up for your terrible aim. You can give up, but the most common reaction informs every one of the options available to you in a moment of crisis. It whispers in your ear impending doom, a siren song, the call of the void hypnotizing your will into dumbstruck resignation. When the barrage comes at you, you'll feel like you have no choice. You are at the mercy of fate. And without taking another second to size up the situation, you give in to the call, the leap of faith to capricious fate. But the real choice is not fight or flight. It's composure or panic. It's self-control or instinctual desperation. All of your biological programming and social conditioning conspire against you in this moment, and you are possessed by panic. But this is the moment that defines the human being. This is the rite of passage that separates the robot from the person, the boy from the man, the animal from the human. Choosing composure when all hell is arrayed against you, that is what it means to be human. Instead of being a creature of habit addicted to creature comforts, being a creative, autonomous individual. Ask yourself, when was the last time in a moment of panic that you lived up to such a standard? This is what I want to discuss today, becoming human. But before moving on, a little background on this podcast. About 10 years ago, I had an idea, the surfing violinist. I surf and I play violin, and I thought that would not just be an easy branding mechanism to achieve notoriety on the internet, which is kind of one of the reasons, but a good description of my own personal hopes and dreams. Societies and systems, biological Benedict Arnolds within, and well-meaning mentors without, all conspire to force irrefutably unique human beings to become types or specialists. And I learned from my hobbies, surfing and violin, that even activities as different as surfing and violin could inform one another, that we as human beings function far better when cross-pollinating lessons learned elsewhere. The goal of this podcast is to try to get closer to that ideal of synthesizing and integrating life lessons from across the spectrum to become human beings instead of settling for lives of one-note specialization, rendering us incompetent outside of our own field of expertise. Specialization is in fact a form of slavery, as R. Buckminster Fuller said, wherein the expert is fooled into accepting slavery by making him feel that he in turn is in a socially and culturally preferred, ergo highly secure lifelong position. With this podcast, I seek to discover a more integrated, robust, and resilient independence. That though I may be a student or employee that is trapped in a situation I do not fully enjoy or agree with, that I know how to dance through the obstacles instead of despairing or stewing in anger. To choose a creative and improvisational composure over a stilted and straitjacketed hopeless resignation oiled by opioids, pity, and booze. So, a few rules for the podcast. Me and Judah have had one phone conversation before going live here.
So there was rules?
So, yeah. We're making up as we go. First is a time limit. As you can tell, I talk too much. So we have to, I think, put a time limit in place. And the time limit is going to be arbitrary, an hour and 11 minutes. That's going to be the max that allow the Surfing Violinist podcast to go. And then I'm not going to put a lower limit because I don't think the lower limit will be a problem with this thing. So anywhere between probably 40 minutes and an hour and 11 minutes is kind of what I'm looking at. As far as broadcasts, right now we're doing it this morning, Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Is Saturday actually a good time for you, Judah?
Absolutely,
Okay, I think we're going to try to keep this, so tune back in on Saturday mornings, and these podcasts will be available in audio form on iTunes. And then release schedule. Yeah, since starting this job, I've been able to listen to podcasts much more. Manual labor is actually really great for that. When do you listen to podcasts, Judah?
On the road, I've got about 3 or 4 hours, like an hour here, an hour there. I'm traveling, and I mostly listen to it on the road.
Okay, so three or 4 hours like a week, or
A day.
3 to 4 hours a day? Oh
Yeah,
wow.
that I'm on the road. Yeah.
Oh man, so you have been able to listen to podcasts for a long time. See, one of the problems when I was working doing video editing, I'd be sitting in front of this computer, and you really can't listen to people talk or music while you're video editing.
No, yeah, I've tried doing that, and it's hard. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if I were in computer programming, I would have a difficult time too, because you just hear people talking, and it just, yeah.
You can't well, especially as a man, I think. They say men have a really hard time was multitasking, and so I find that like I need all my attention when I'm doing something, especially video editing. It's amazing how much we use our ears to edit.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
I mean, that really is what I think separates good editing from bad editing is cutting in beats, cutting in rhythm that actually, I don't know, it almost feels like music in a way, even if you don't have the music with it.
Sentences of flow.
Yeah. Actually, I was watching something the other day. Is this really weird, it's a YouTube channel. It was a weird video where they took the Take On Me music video, the one where he sketches himself. Remember that 80s?
Yeah.
And he goes into the notebook or whatever. So they had taken it and done this weird, like, it's not stop motion, but it had like little puppets or something, those little smiley face puppets. They're actually musical notes. And the cuts were in time, and without hearing what it was, I started hearing Take On Me. Because you know how Facebook will play it muted? I was just watching it, and I was like, man, what is this? And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute. And I started hearing it without even playing. I mean, that's pretty weird.
That is weird.
So,
I don't want to get too far off. Do you want to talk? I kind of want to talk about the premise, the poem, the thought of the day.
Right. So the thought of the day, the point of this podcast is becoming human, basically. Mm-hmm. The idea being that I think we live as something less than human a lot of time. We live as an algorithm, as a program. Our boss tells us what to do. Our teacher tells us what to do. Our parents tell us what to do. Society tells us what to do. Our religion tells us what to do. And usually those things, like if you think of the division of labor, that idea that each person has their own role to play in a certain larger goal. When you divide that labor, then sometimes your labor ends up defining who you are outside of that time. And so I think we get in these ruts where we're used to being a violinist, we're used to being a surfer, we're used to being a factory worker, we're used to being a person sitting and listening to some religious speaker. So sometimes we just get in this passive rut. And so that's kind of the idea here, is to redefine humanity as more than the sum of our parts. And I think most of the time society and culture try to force us into something less, not just less than some of our parts, but like actually less than our individual parts. So,
well, and I don't even, I mean, even beyond society and culture, I think that it's a human flaw.
Yes.
That when it comes to action, when it comes to valor, we freeze.
Okay. Yeah, technical thing here. Someone said I can't hear the other guy properly. Try it now. Test. Give me a test, Judah.
I think we're off Facebook too. Test.
Looks like we froze on Facebook. Are the other ones actually still working? It looks like Twitch is still working.
Go to Twitch. Can you sign language? Do you know sign language?
That's weird. I don't know what happened. Oh, okay. Is it still working if anybody's on Facebook? It looks like it froze on mine.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, I'll put the Twitch. Twitch has the most stable stream right now, so I'll put that in the Facebook if you're having a hard time seeing it.
Yeah, so this the thing that the monologue, the thought of the day, what it brings to my mind is that moment here. I'll bring my that moment of decision when it's time for action. I wonder if over the years, with society, with the way culture has changed, there was a time when we would run when we were faced with something, but now that the complexity of the moment, now that it's become more complex, as far as like it's not a big monster, it's not a big toothy thing trying to eat us,
Right.
that we freeze, or that we escape into our mind, we go numb.
Right. Well, I've been feeling like that a lot with sometimes when I get overwhelmed at work. So because I'm doing something I haven't done before, and when they give me one person will tell me, one way to do something, another person will tell me another way to do something, and then the customer asks me a question that throws both of those two bits of advice into conflict. And I mean, I don't like, this is not meant to sound flippant, but I almost feel kind of autistic in a sense. Like I've got, I don't know, does not compute. I can't, it's like I cannot come up with a response, and I just freeze. There's moments in Community with Abed's character where he would just freeze, like he cannot compute what's, and I feel like that. But my reaction is not freezing. My reaction is anger. And I just start, and anybody's worked with me for any amount of time in any field has seen me get into I blow up. I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. You're a bunch of idiots.
You turn into the Hulk.
I turn into,
hoping it will miraculously make up
Yes.
for your terrible aim.
my terrible aim. I think that's actually a pretty good way to put it.
Oh, thank you. I just came up with it.
Yeah, no, that's well said there.
I do the same thing, except I don't turn into the Hulk. My terrible aim, I just typically shoot everywhere.
Yes. It's
You
like
know?
a shotgun, with
Yeah.
buckshot, and you're just like,
Just to throw the spaghetti against the wall, hope it
hope
sticks
something
somewhere.
sticks. Yes, yeah. That's pretty much how it feels. And I started boxing in the last year, on and off, with some friends, and one of the guys is, well, they're both heavyweights in comparison to me. I'm about 170. One of the guys is maybe 204, and the other guy's upwards of 220, I think. And so, and they're in good shape, and they've got, the tendency is to think of, heavier guys have less cardio and less endurance. These guys are monsters, and there's dance circles around me in the ring. And then when
220 of muscle.
muscle, yeah, and they'll get me into a corner, and that feeling, I started calling it the panic mechanic, like that feeling of like I don't know what to do, and you just get this tunnel vision, and it's like you're in a cave, and you just start doing stupid stuff. You start just lashing out and opening yourself up to real pain by not covering yourself properly, and that's why if you're a fan of boxing, it is really instructive to watch someone like Floyd Mayweather. He can turtle through someone's barrage and be what we're talking about here, like a human being.
Yeah.
Actually, resist the passionate pull of just go out there, all guns blazing sort of thing.
Yeah. But it reminds me of, one of the things I counsel boys at schools, at like inner city schools, and one of the things I talk about a lot is the spectrum between animal and king. And for a man, that spectrum, even though it's a spectrum, we often have to use all, at every point of that spectrum, there is use. So sometimes we'll be told that anger is a bad thing, that anger is, an evil thing. So that animal side tends to get the pejorative view, it's the bad side,
Right.
and the king side is the good side. But we talk, I give them time to talk about times in your life when you might need that animal instinct. You might need that the anger to accomplish something. You might need that instinct to bite, that instinct to grab. You might need it to survive. You might need it to protect your kid or your wife or your friend. There are times that we need every part of that spectrum.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about coming up. I'm going to mention some podcasts that I've been listening to that have been instructive to me. And I think what we really have to get, I had a little rant the other day after hearing this one guy, Paul Stamets. He's a fungal expert. He's an expert on fungi and mushrooms. And Joe Rogan...
Sounds like a fun guy.
I knew someone. Yeah, I knew. One of us was going to do. Oh man, Rohit, thank you for the donation. That's man, appreciate it. Well, that brings up the question of support. I do want to mention it a little bit. I am working a full time job, and like this week, after this. I have to go for a drive and go do some more work. So it's 50-hour week job. I'm not expecting these first few months to make what I make at this job, but at a certain point, I kind of want to make at least what I'm making overtime on that other job, because this included with my regular job is going to be 70 to 80 hour work weeks, and if this does not end up being paying what the other job pays, then yeah, I will not be able to do it forever. But we're going to give a couple months to at least test this out, and allow patrons to get on board if they want to support. I'm not going to be charging in May on Patreon because it would be really unfair. It used to be a video-based thing. While we have video, this is more audio focused. This is more about sharing stuff. Yes, podcast format. So if you can support, you can go over to Patreon. You can also donate through PayPal, thesurfingviolinist@gmail.com. And I'm sure we'll come up with some other merch and things like that, some tier structures in Patreon. But I do want to give existing patrons the option to opt out if they want to. So thanks a lot, Rohit. He says he's been watching for a long time. Glad to see you back. So we're back, kind of, sort of. We'll do this weekly podcast deal, live podcast.
The fun guy.
The fun guy. Yeah, the fun guy, Paul Stamets, he talked about how we really have a lot to learn from the fungal kingdom, and how mushrooms and I'm learning about this a bit in my job, because we have to deal with taking out water damaged materials from a house and get rid of the mold. We call it microbial growth. And this mold can be very destructive. But what he's pointed out is so many of our innovations, you think about penicillin. Penicillin in an alternative form, it's like a different species or a different genus or something like that, in houses is bad for you. Like you breathe it in, it's one of those black mold kind of things, penicillium. But somebody stumbled on penicillin, a very similar species that ended up being very helpful in the medical side of things. Anyways, this guy is talking about how much we have to learn from these other kingdoms, specifically fungi. And I think it kind of goes back to what you're saying. Like you can't just pretend that human life is sugar spice everything nice, and that we're just these nice civilized robots, and everyone's everything's awesome, everything's cool when you're part of a team. Like there's more to our naturalistic biological genetic history, and it does no good to turn a blind eye to what the natural world can teach us about biological history. And there are some interesting things in that podcast. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into this part here. 3 podcasts of note for the week. If you're interested in podcasts, you got time to listen to podcasts. It's Joe Rogan's interview with Paul Stamets, the expert on fungi. And that's Joe Rogan Experience number 1035. I was recommended this by Alex Irzari on Facebook. So thanks for that. This is one I could listen to 3 more times probably. This guy just bears his expertise soul. And it's kind of interesting, in the Star Trek Discovery show, they based a character on him, and they called him Paul Stamets after this guy.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's some really interesting stuff in this. It seems like a boring topic, like, wow, mushrooms. What other than tripping? What is it? What good are they, dude? There's some rewiring brain stuff in this podcast. It's insane.
It's interesting. I just saw it was like a preview, or it was a commercial for, it was like National Geographic or something, or those those videos they do of nature, and the whole thing, it was like what do you call it? Time lapse of all kinds of different fungi and mushrooms, but it showed how fungi just destroyed things,
Right.
Like it showed the time lapse, how it just would just take over a tree and just sap it dry.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and they have that one, fungus that it's growing to be the largest organism on Earth, somewhere in Oregon or something like that, and that's what it does. It's killing all the trees that it goes through. So really interesting things in that podcast. And then Joe Rogan's interview, second podcast I want to mention, his interview with Dennis McKenna. And this guy's a drug expert, like I guess it's psychotropic, like hallucinatory drugs, not just we think of LSD, but he goes into all these other things. He kind of had a hippie background, but he's parlayed that into a very successful academic career and just really intelligent. And he says we need to look at the plant kingdom for inspiration on how to better, to be more sustainable, to be more integrated, to be less raping and pillaging. And, I think he's a little bit over the top sometimes, but there's some interesting things there to think about. Like, I think instead of thinking just about the natural world as a place for resources for, hard products or materials, we can study, and both of them reference this, we can study how the natural world unconsciously solves certain problems of efficiency and energy and life support in much more efficient ways than we do when we're a business or government or a religious structure. And so I think there's a lot of clues. It's like in some ways nature is almost a template for how to do certain things better. And going back to what you said about sometimes, denigrating the idea of being an animal. And there are times when being an animal is a good thing. Like, you want a berserker to be on your side if you're up against an army of White Walkers or something like that, right? Like, you want somebody who can, you want the Hulk when there is an alien invading horde, So, and I think that's kind of the idea of the whole surfing violinist experiment, is to try to learn how to be better at all these component parts of what it means to be a human.
Well, so let me ask you a question. Is it okay if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In what ways has your berserk? Because I don't see you as a Hulk. I mean, you're a strong guy, but I don't see you as somebody who I need on my team to take out a bunch of White Walkers. How has your berserkerness, how has your anger helped you in the past?
I think it's best helped me when I've actually channeled it into something creative, and I found a way to better package it so that it wasn't like destructive. It was more insightful, I guess. Like, I think some of our best fiction ends up being like that. You think it's coming at you this way, and then all of a sudden, that's when the attack comes, not from the front, but from the side, from the other raptor you didn't even know was there. That's almost like a rhetorical way of catching somebody off guard through entertainment or music or whatever. And so I think a few times in my storytelling I've done it.
I don't understand though how anger does that. Can you explain that?
I think, okay, so for instance, there was one time I was going on a trip outside the country and they were requiring us to get vaccinated with a bunch of different things. I'm not anti-vax, but I've been overseas before, and I just didn't want to get this one shot again. It was just like, you always have to have someone to tell you to wear your seatbelt. You always have to, you got to do the, you want to do something nice. Okay, well, you got to have this license. And so I got mad about it, but rather than just coming on Facebook and whining about it or complaining about it, I wrote a script for the first video I uploaded on this channel. It was called Pushing Up Permits. And so it was about people trying to do good things, but then this bureaucratic board is like, no, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. And to this day, I still think it's kind of funny. So that was one way. That was one way.
That's the one where Jesus shows up,
right? Yeah, at the end he shows up, and they're like,
Spoiler
no, you
alert.
have to have a healing permit. Another guy wants to work at a soup kitchen, and they're like, no, you need to be certified in soup kitchen, ladling soup. And then another guy wants to give his money away, and they're like, okay, well, you need to fill out this book. The book is like that big. So I think I've been able to do that in the past, but I think when we as people get backed against the wall, whether it's in work or whatever else, we can kind of get in despair, and then you want to get actually like physically aggressive or angry. So
it's interesting. I just realized that while you're talking about that, I'm looking at this picture. Have you ever seen that picture?
I think I've seen. Yeah, I think I have. I think I saw it when I was up there in Chicago.
A Hulk and a Serene. I don't know, but I guess so. To really get down, like to laser down on what you're saying, does the anger help you focus? Is that what it does? Or are you just talking about how you divert your anger? Because I want to know, how does your anger help you?
Well, I think when it's in a good place, when you're using it properly, I mean, anger can help you realize that something's wrong, right? I mean, it's just like a red
Yeah.
flag, like something's going wrong. I mean, not all anger. I mean, anger itself's not bad. It's what you do in response to that. And
Mm,
if I get into a Hulk berserker mode, and I don't think you've ever seen me like, I mean, it's happened in the boxing ring a couple times, and um, yeah, I mean, even though they're bigger than me, like they still don't want to get hit by my
mm,
shovel hook. So there's a time for a shovel hook, I mean, if somebody's beating up a little kid, I mean, it's just a story of every superhero story. If there's somebody innocent that can't defend themselves, I mean, and there's some tool bag who's doesn't care and is just
mhm,
going to take advantage of someone. I mean, there's a time for anger channeled into the berserker mode, but you need to learn to control it. And I think that's what most of our military movies are. Most movies about kung fu, most movies about, I mean, even knights, in Game of Thrones. So
yeah.
just just that you train so that it does not master you, but you can summon it at will, I guess. And so I
Yes.
think that there's a purpose to the berserker thing, and and we've talked about this before in reverse redaction, that our culture really doesn't give people a good outlet for that. We kind of
Right.
have to passively view it on TV or in movies or read about it, but we don't actually get to find places to apply that justifiable rage about things that are not right.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about. I was listening to a Jordan Peterson. I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson nowadays. Since you
Hmm.
introduced, I think you introduced him to me, but I he was talking about. I don't know. There's just this one clip where he talked about the utter focus and just like where time slows down. He was talking about like when you're in a wreck or something and
Right.
you have that experience where everything just slows down. He's
Hmm.
talked about how the reason we can't do that regularly is because it takes so many resources from
Yeah.
our body, and we just like afterwards. That's why a lot of times, even if you weren't hurt, you feel just drained
Yep.
because. And I've just been thinking about like, so I've been trying to be more healthy with eating vitamins and stuff like that, and just thinking about like how to turn that on. With my guys, I try to get them to get angry,
Right.
not provoke them, but I said, get, can you, like you just said, can you get yourself angry, on call
Right.
rather than react to something,
Yeah.
and
See, and
it controls you rather than you
I
control
think
it.
I think that's the big part. The biggest thing is that you learn to summon it, channel it, and don't be mastered by it.
Because that's the best way for me. The What I'm realizing, that is the best way to get yourself into that crash mode where time slows
Yep.
down. It's to get angry and focused.
Right. And so if you can find a way to tap into that in a good way, and I think this is one of the problems with civilized society where everything's antiseptic and everything is domesticated and clean, that we can kind of forget that there is death. I mean, death persists, and so, and that I mean, there are things like, well, we'll get into it in a little bit. The final podcast I do want to mention here is one of our own, and this was the Reverse Redaction podcast we did with Jared about Annihilation. So Jared is the one that actually recommended to that film to us. I'd actually liked us to reverse redact our reverse redaction of Annihilation. I'd actually like to go back and watch it again. We'd
Yeah.
actually mentioned it in the podcast, so maybe we could even watch it together or something. And Jared had something absolutely fascinating to say. He said he'd heard somewhere about how human beings, or maybe it was in his psychology studies, how human beings are like waterfalls, where the water that was there yesterday is not there today. There's no two molecules of water that are ever going to be consistent in the existence of that waterfall, right?
Yeah.
So, and he's saying how, our cells, the cells that are in us now compared to the cells that were in us when we were born, like we're changing. We are change constantly. That's what a human being is. And
Physically, we're a completely different person.
right. Physically, we're a completely different person. And when he said that, and in the context of that movie, I just thought that was really fascinating. And then the other thing you said about how annihilation can also mean the creation of energy from It's like the transfiguration of matter into energy or something like that, and that's what annihilation can mean in physics. And that movie has some interesting things to say about human evolution, and there is a sort of well, I mean, sad side of it. It's a sad side of life in which death begets life. And we kind of have to take that again. We have to learn that lesson from nature. We have to take that into our moral lives, into our social lives, to be able to sacrifice ourselves and almost daily in order to like rise like a phoenix the next day, so to speak. So there were some interesting things in those podcasts. I'd recommend all three of those.
Can you say them real quick, all three of them?
So Paul Stamets interview with Joe Rogan on JRE number 1035. The following one is Dennis McKenna's interview with Joe Rogan, JRE number 1133. And then our two-part podcast on the film Annihilation. So 3 podcasts for you to consider this week if you're interested in any of these kind of topics. So check that out. For your consideration, I've got a book, and I want to read this little part. It's from Carl Jung. And so I was going to ask you, in your readings and your experience, because I know you've got some psychological background. What's your thoughts on Jung?
You want me to just...
Yeah, just go off for a minute. I got to pick up the book.
Okay, yeah. So what's interesting about Jung, it's been a while since I've been to school, but I've been using a lot of his theory on the ideals, the ideal self, and what is it called? You put me on the spot here, but I'm working with a program that uses Jung's theories to help us become better men. So working on I'm part of a program called Becoming a Man, and it's an offshoot, or it uses things from the Mankind Project, which is there's a lot of influence from Jung on there, talking about my brain just went soft here. What the ideal self, and looking at come on, what is the he says the
You talking about like facing the shadow?
Oh yeah, well, definitely facing the shadow. We talk a lot about facing the shadow, but about what the shadow is in our own lives.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically using the energy from the shadow, from that struggle with the shadow, to reach the light or gold, in our lives.
Okay, that kind of ties into this whole theme here. So I was going to read this one passage from On Jung by Anthony Stevens, and this is just it's really interesting to learn how much some of these great people, figures of history, great thinkers, philosophers, change agents, what they went through. I think we tend to, again, idolize. We either make too little of ourselves, or we make too much of those who've come before us. And he actually had some, I would say, schizophrenic experiences. Yeah. And this explains one of these. The whole experience brought him to the edge of madness. Not only did he hear voices, play like a child, and walk around in his garden holding lengthy conversations with an imaginary companion, but he believed his house to be invaded by spirits. He reports that on one occasion the front doorbell began ringing frantically when no one was there. I was sitting near the doorbell and not only heard it but saw it moving. We all simply stared at one another. The atmosphere was thick, believe me. Then I knew that something had to happen. The whole house was filled as if there were a crowd present, crammed full of spirits. They were packed deep right up to the door, and the air was so thick that it was scarcely possible to breathe. As for myself, I was all aquiver with the question, for God's sake, what in the world is this? Then they cried out in chorus, "We have come back from Jerusalem, where we found not what we sought." He dealt with this intrusion by writing his 7 Sermons of the Dead. It poured out of him, and within 3 evenings it was written. As soon as I took up the pen, the whole ghostly assemblage evaporated. The room quieted, and the atmosphere cleared. The haunting was over. But experiences like this warned him how perilous a state he was in, and how desperately he needed to keep a hold on reality. He would repeat to himself, I have a medical diploma from a Swiss university. I must help my patients. I have a wife and 5 children. I live at 228 Seestrasse Kunschnacht. In order to remind himself that he really existed and that he was not a quote-unquote blank page whirling about in the winds of the spirit like Nietzsche, who went mad when he had similar experiences. Jung recognized, of course, the irony that he, a psychiatrist, should run into the same psychic material as is found in the insane. He was exploring the same fund of unconscious images which fatally confused the psychotic patient. But this only confirmed for him the truth of Bleuler's teaching, namely, that there is no fundamental distinction between the healthy and the abnormal mind. Through active imagination, he was merely entering the realms of the psyche, which are normally inaccessible to people when they are sane. I thought that was fantastic that he had to write this. And these last 2 years, I have done such a poor job, because this has been the most depressed time of my life. I've done such a poor job of doing what he did there, writing down on a piece of paper, I have a medical diploma from a Swiss university. I must help my patients. Grounding himself in the reality of the people around him, grounding himself in the reality of the responsibilities he had to his family. I think that's just fantastic. I mean, that's a very fundamental, tactile way of dealing with mental health issues.
Oh,
and
man.
I read that, and that just really, and I mean, how many people, there are people I know who are struggling with that kind of thing. Like, it's easy to make light of this stuff. Like, oh, yeah, that person's just crazy. It's like, we medicate ourselves so that we don't actually get to experience that. We find things that divert us from the abyss of hell that's right on the other side of the veneer. This is not some made up thing. Like, people are struggling with this stuff because they've peered into the heart of darkness, right?
Well, one of the things that I really appreciated, I learned in the in one of these weekends, for the Mankind Project, was that they'll look at you, because you get confronted. There's a lot of confrontation, like what's going on right now, and they say, where are you right now? You need to be here right now. Where do you go? Do you do this often? And it really, as first time I've ever heard that, like, you need to be here. Here, right? Come back.
Right.
Do you do this often? Do you numb out? Because often that's what we do. We put up this persona. Jung talks a lot about the persona, and we just go behind this mask and hide instead of facing the shadow. But you can also just facing adventure. That's what adventure is.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually brings us to my next little monologue here. So on reverse redaction, and we do want to have Jared back. Have you seen the Game of Thrones? Have you kept up with Game of Thrones?
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. I haven't seen them all, but I've pirated some of them and watched the others. Yeah.
Okay. No one heard that.
I mean, arg pirate.
Arg pirate. Okay. So yeah, we definitely want to have him back on to talk about Game of Thrones, and I've been putting off seeing Endgame. So that's one of the things I do want to say about as far as format of this podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to help us to find our unique place as human beings on this earth, that is not dependent on whatever the culture's talking about. So when we give recommendations in this particular podcast, it's going to be all over the place. You're going to get some Jung, you're going to get some old proverb from who knows where. You're going to get podcasts that haven't aired in 5 years. So the show is not concerned with currency. And for the comments and the chat, like, I will peruse these later on. But this is much more focused podcast, not as much of a conversational podcast. But in reverse redaction, we will kind of use whatever's in pop culture to kind of stimulate our conversation. But I want to move on from this Jung situation where he apparently, thinks that he had these conversations with an array of spirits. I'm sorry, that's the good segue for another segment.
I was trying to.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is typical. This is why I need Judah, because I go off on these tangents and I forget what I was talking about. So one of our segments is going to be called "Go to Hell." So there was a piece written by Sergei Rachmaninoff, and I actually do want to play this, so let me bring it up. Apologies.
So you're gonna play the actual piece?
No, I'm not gonna play the actual piece. And I'm not logged in, am I? I'm sorry.
Grab your violin. Let's hear it.
No, I can't play it. So I tried to learn that. Well, you'll hear the whole story. So the piece is called The Prelude in C Sharp Minor. And it was written by Sergei Rachmaninoff. And it sounds about like, let's see. I think this one's good. Ah, there it is. The piece you're now hearing was written by Sergei Rachmaninoff. I was just obsessed with it after hearing it in the film Shine about pianist David Helfgott. I tried learning to play this piece on piano and it got stuck in my head. I had a dream one night that I was trying to play the piece, and all of a sudden, the piano began playing the piece by itself. And then it began to utter a guttural, hellacious growl. It was as if the prelude in C Sharp Minor were a melodic gateway to hell. The piano spontaneously erupted into flames, and the demonic incantation continued. I picked up an axe and began swinging it at the piano. The memory of the dream ends there. Today, while writing this, I was listening to the prelude in C Sharp Minor on SoundCloud, and the piece ended. And then I heard this. All of a sudden, I heard a little jazzy run on the piano as a new song began. But I realized this is the prelude in C Sharp Minor, but jazzified. Nat King Cole covered this classic piano piece with his trio and a twist. He took a minor key piece in one of the most god-awful keys imaginable and somehow made it dance. When I was a Christian college student, we had a good old boy preacher as a professor, and he would say that we should be audacious enough to charge the gates of hell with a water pistol. The image is cute, but we're not going to defeat the army of the dead with weapons. As much as I love the concept of the Doom video game series, weapons will not suffice. You cannot eradicate evil with violence, only with painful and purposeful poise in the face of the terror. It is not detonation but dance that will bait the energy of destruction into something constructive. You know what hell looks like? The sun. The hottest fathomable thing makes life possible, and I think that is why all of our best stories have our heroes and heroines going into the depths to commit an act of hellish self-sacrifice to find the climatic solution to dilemmas that cannot be seen in the light of day. Orpheus in the underworld, Dante in the Inferno, Jonah in the whale, Tony Stark in the wormhole, Benjen beyond the wall. Go to hell. That's where the answer is. But like Nat King Cole, learn to dance when you do, lest you be overwhelmed by that voice of the void that tells you all is lost. Just throw yourself on the pyre. Go to hell, but learn to dance first.
Wow.
There you
good.
go. So that kind of gets at the whole theme of this podcast, being a human being in the face of whew, man, you want to look at what hell looks like. Look at the natural kingdom. Sometimes we talk about the good things of the natural kingdom, but go read about hornets and what they do to bees. It's just it's genocide. Like there's just crazy stuff that happens. Parasites, and they talk about this in I think both of those podcasts, and we talked about it in the Annihilation episode about the fungus that infects the ant and blows his head up, so it'll infect other ants. That like controls the ant's mind. It's like a little computer program that tells the ant where to go. This is crazy stuff, man. So there's a lot to learn. Practical considerations. This is going to be another segment we'll talk about, and these will probably be more neatly, I think, packaged when we get better into the swing of this thing. But one of the things we say on the Reverse Redaction podcast is get to work. There's a lot to build. And so since I started this new job after the hurricane, I've been doing a lot of demolition. Like if something's broken, you have to tear it down so you can rebuild it better. And one of the things I have not been able to, one mess I haven't been able to get to is my room. So there it is in all its messy glory. So that's my practical get to work. There's a lot to order. Is my room. So that's my challenge for the week. Do you have a challenge you've been meaning to work on?
Challenge that I've been meaning to work on. Yeah, talking about facing hell brings up a lot of so my hope is to I want to I'm going to but there's a lot of job opportunities ahead of me, and one of them, the interview, they ask you to really face your shadow.
Mm,
And I actually tried doing that the other day and realized, or I was confronted or shown that that I'm not really going deep enough, not really facing my insecurities and fears.
right.
And so I really want to start. No, I don't want to start. I want to face those. I want to start. I want to think about those places in me this week. Really understand, like, what is it that petrifies me? What is it that paralyzes me in that
Mm,
moment?
right.
What is that fear of failure? See, I really I want to get granular on it to figure out, and be able to talk about it.
Right.
Even though it's a scary place to go.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's we again, this is one of the things I'm trying to get together. I tried writing a book before the hurricane hit, and I'd got 60,000 words in, and then the hurricane hit, and I went back and read it, and I was like, this is garbage. But there's some good moments in the book, and one of the things I try to emphasize in this building a better me idea, is trying to fully flesh out what it means to be human being, is that, again, it's not a specialty. It's not one direction or the other. It's both directions at the same time. It's like, it would be better to think of it like if you think of video games, like choose your class. Do you want to be a red mage, a white mage, a black mage, a fighter, a thief, or whatever, Like, you want to be more like, in the old classic Final Fantasy lore, a red mage that does white and black magic and fights. You want to expand in all areas. Personality tests tend to limit you. They tend to say, oh, well, this is what you're good at. This is what you're going to be. You're going to be an I or an E. You're going to be a J or a P or whatever it is. I think we need to go in both directions. It's not good enough to be one thing.
Exactly.
And that's what a human being is. It's the ability to adapt. We adapt our surroundings. We adapt the environment, and our minds to make tools to make things better. We are adaptable intellectually, emotionally. So we have to adapt. We can't just have this, this thing that has been given up from upon high. This is the type of person you are. It's like The Giver, like this is the role you will play in society. It's like,
Well, but see, it's not just other people. The thing that I realized,
Yeah.
and see in this thing that somebody pointed out, is I say, oh, I'm the kind of guy who, like, I'm a disorganized guy, and we put these labels on ourselves,
Right.
this like low resolution
yeah,
excuse.
yep, yeah, you're right. That's exactly it. We have a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I'm disorganized. I'm a mess, but I'm good at other things. We let those other things kind of subsidize our mediocrity in another area, and people pay the price for that. If I'm not dealing with my temper, if I'm not dealing with my messes that I create, you can't run a good business if you're a mess. It's like the van that I have to keep, it keeps getting messy. It's like, and they say, it's like, if you don't have everything, all your tools in the proper place where you know where to find them, if you don't put your tool back after you've used it, you won't know where it is next time. I mean, it's simple, but it's so easy to forget for people who tend to be more disorganized or frazzled.
My dad used to always say, a place for everything and everything in its place.
A place for everything and everything in its place. That's great, man. Yeah.
And I never learned it.
Oh, well, me and you both are like this, and we're a mess. Look at you, you're a mess. One day I'm gonna tell that story. I love that story about the time that I got in the debate with the street preacher. Oh man, dude, it's hilarious. The funny thing, a little teaser. It was one of those things where I won the argument, but then 10 years later, I was like, oh, that guy was right. Because he insulted me. He was just like, look at you, you're a mess. Would you iron those khakis with a rock? Oh, man. I thought I might drop him, which I did in the moment. I got him, but then he said that one in my... It's, again, like, sometimes people saying bad stuff to you can actually be good. It can be for your good and kicking the butt. And,
Yeah.
A place for everything and everything is place. Okay, the last thing. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I didn't know a real place to put it. So me and Melissa, we had this idea for a while, starting a brand called Local Legend. Well, I'm just going to end every episode with a local legend. And the background of the story goes back to India. So we were in India. We were at the probably the peak of our success, I guess, in terms of audience outreach, and I was doing what I felt like I was made to do: creative, cross-cultural, constructive, getting people to join together around common interests, and but at the same time, I felt pretty alienated and isolated from America. I didn't feel like I felt disconnected. I didn't feel at home with my own home cultures. And, we were over there, but I felt like people back here just didn't get us or whatever. So one of our viewers wrote this, and this is one of the most, I guess, encouraging things I've received. So I'm going to read his note, and then I'm going to read my note in response. And it'll get at what I'm trying to communicate through local legend. So this was something he wrote to me. So at the tail end of a week-long binge of all your uploaded videos on YouTube, I simply wanted to express my gratitude. I quit my job a few months back and moved back in with my parents. My psyche was shattered by the rat race I had joined right out of college. The subsequent fog of depression was really taking its toll, and I decided to let it out by being a vegetable subsisting off of my parents. But then I stumbled upon your videos. Your and your wonderful family and friends' adventures and positive outlook on life has had a massive impact. I spent a lot of my childhood exploring and learning about this city others call Delhi and I call home, but then I grew jaded for some reason. I could see nothing but the negative, and everything I read and saw would only compound that. When you come along with your videos and your spirit, and it was like a flaming arrow through the fog. That was the phrase that jumped out to me when I read this. And it was so encouraging to me and my wife that something that we did, something we made, was like a flaming arrow through the fog. I discovered that there was something I could aspire to other than a hefty bank balance and a fancy car. I'm talking about your spirit of adventure and your enthusiasm for both the strange and the mundane. I'm happy to tell you that I went and rediscovered one of my childhood's favorite haunts, the Tughlaqabad Fort, on Saturday. I'm headed out to Coronation Park in a couple of hours, another one of my favorite childhood haunts. This would not have been possible without you and your family friends putting yourselves out there with a spirit that I can only dream of having. If you're ever feeling down and or unfulfilled, please know that in Delhi there resides this weird dude who is insanely and irrevocably grateful to you. TLDR, thank you, and I owe you big time. And then I wrote in response. When I was about 10 years old, I was playing a violin in a small community youth orchestra in Tallahassee, Florida. I was never probably going to be a professional violinist, but I didn't know that then. I tried hard and I practiced well. Our rehearsals were held on the Florida State University's music school campus. One Saturday morning, some college kid listened to us play. I wasn't first chair. I may not have even been first violin. I really can't remember. I don't even remember what we were playing. But I will never forget that this student came up to me after the performance and handed me a note. It was just a scrap of college-ruled paper, and on it he had written a few encouraging words and the sentence that I remember, as it's in my other violin case back in the U.S., which I haven't found since I returned, unfortunately. Something was written on the paper like this: your practice and hard work will take you far in the field of music. I don't even remember his face, and I will never be able to repay him, but those 3 sentences, scribbled, not even sentences, those few words scribbled on a scrap of paper have meant more to me in my music life than any compliment or instruction I've ever received. Your words today have had that level of impact. I sometimes can't articulate why we're doing what we're doing. I started off over a decade ago as one of those Christian missionary types who only thinks of religious bottom lines. My first trip taught me so much about myself and how fake my quote-unquote Christian life was. I thought I was a good person until the cramped gullies of Varanasi revealed what an asshole I was. Over the next 10 years, marriage and parenthood were the 2 main tutors revealing how much more I needed to learn about life and how much I needed to change about myself. So I came back to India with more humility and with the same curiosity that has inspired so many white Westerners to come here, but with one crucial difference. I was sick of bad news. I'm still sick of it. It makes me want to quit. I didn't intentionally make positive videos, but I did intentionally come back to see what other things India had to teach me about myself, and it has taught me plenty. And in the meantime, I've had enormous difficulty trying to explain to anyone and everyone what it is we're doing. Atheist American friends tell me I have white guilt, and I'm doing this out of some antiquated religious obligation. Christian American friends tell me I'm wasting my time on YouTube when I should be out spreading the good news, quote unquote. Indians who want to go to America tell me I'm sacrificing my kids on the altar of my own irrational Videshi free-spiritedness. Conservative Hindus worry that I'm here for the very bottom line my Christian friends and family expect me to be. I feel pulled and pushed back and forth, just a rag doll for everyone else's expectations. I wrote all this to say thank you for taking the time to write what you did. You have articulated for me what I cannot often articulate for myself. This is why I play music. This is why I write. This is why I make videos, to give someone the kind of jolt that college kid gave me in that rehearsal room back in Tallahassee. This jolt doesn't know any creed or nationality or linguistic block. But whatever its origin, I want to say thank you for being the guy to give me that jolt this week. Your words have been every bit as much as the ones that kid wrote to me 20 years ago, and I'll never forget them. So local legend, the whole point of that is we went over to another place, and we just we stayed in one place. We stayed in Delhi, and we just explored Delhi. I mean, you could spend 2 lifetimes in Delhi trying to unearth all the historic and cultural and musical and linguistic nuance of that place. So it's a big place. But when you live in that place, like our friend there, it becomes mundane, you know? Mm-hmm. And when I came back from India, I had the exact same feeling he had. I came back here. This is beautiful. I mean, our sky is beautiful. Our beach is beautiful. The water is just like Fiji level beautiful. And it's like for the first 2 years coming back, I was just in the fog. I remember the day that we went to see, we did a reverse redaction podcast on Blade Runner 2049. I think it was our first one. The day I went to go watch it, the surf was up, and I was walking out in the water, and it's like I felt like an avatar. I felt like I wasn't there, like I was floating above. Like the water did nothing for me. The sand did nothing for me. The waves did nothing for me. It was like I wasn't there. I was in this fog. And I was like, my soul is trapped somewhere out in the Atlantic or something like that. And my body's here, but my mind isn't. My emotions aren't. I'm just not feeling it. And I think there's a difficulty with locality, with location, that makes us almost feel alienated from reality. And I think these screens do have a part to play in that. And
it's not, we talk about it, or like even as you're talking, we talk about it as like it's an outside force, but it's a force inside of us hiding. You know, it's not necessarily acted upon us. I think there is an aspect of that,
right?
But it's something inward that we have to look at, you know, and not just see it as something that we have to break out of outside of us,
right?
But deal with inside. Why are we hiding?
Right.
Be here now. Why aren't you here right now?
Right, exactly. And I think that comes back to dealing with that cleaning, you know, whether it's cleaning the room or your work ethic or just the emotional baggage that's built up over time. And so the whole idea behind the local legend this week that I want to shed a light on is that kid 30 years ago, just going out of his way. I don't know if it was a class assignment, or I don't know if he just like he saw something in me, or if he was just being, paying it forward or something like that. But I mean, it still makes me emotional to this day. I mean, it's just such a small thing, but it made me want to do better. It made me want to try harder. And it's something so mundane, something so small that could affect my life that much. And we have that opportunity every day. And so what I want to do with this part of the podcast, I want to try to find a local here, maybe it's someone living or dead, who has affected our area. And the intent here is not to get you to be like, wow, Panama City must be a cool place. The intent is to get you to do the same thing, and eventually to
where you are.
Yeah, to eventually to get your stories too. To find your own local legend who lived there and inspired you in some way. There are people all around us we walk past all the time. And you think of Bruce Almighty. There's the homeless dude. At the end, it's revealed the homeless dude is Morgan Freeman God. He's been standing there all the time, and nobody pays attention to him. And there are stories that are right next to us that we're overlooking. There are people who can inspire us and probably give us what we need. And we might have some little piece of the puzzle that they need. And so that's the whole idea of local legend. You have a local legend. You might be the local legend. For me, I was an outsider, but I kind of was transplanted in Delhi. And for a few moments there, I was helpful to Anurag and Delhi. And I hope that this podcast will help people think about that. That when you go out, that it's like Bilbo's creed about going on an adventure. Every time you walk out the door, it's an adventure. You do not have to go to deepest, darkest Mordor to find an adventure. You don't have to go to the other side of the planet. You can walk out your front door, and there's adventure to be had. So just to imbue the local area around you with promise. That's kind of the goal of the local legend segment of this podcast. So that's pretty much it for this episode. I think we made it in under the hour and 11 minute. We're just about to go over. So we are going to take a break, and we'll be back with reverse redaction. I'm gonna keep the stream going. I'm just gonna put a little doohickey on. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Until next time, may we all learn to dance towards resilient, robust, and independent integrity. Until next time, Godspeed. Audio's live. And we're almost back. And we're back. Oh man, Google actually has a little beeper. Okay, shut up, dude. Shut up. Ah, stop it. I don't know where it is. Okay, you don't have to keep...
What's going on? You okay?
Audio's live. Oh wait,
I
no.
see nothing.
Almost back. Oh no, I'm hearing audio. Where am I hearing audio from? Oh man, Google actually has a little beeper. Ah, it's Facebook. There's so many tabs open. I got 3 screens. I still don't have enough room. Eventually, it's gonna be like our whole. It's just gonna be this holographic thing. We need it at this point. I can't keep up. I've got 20 windows open.
Oh, mercy.
Okay, so Jared is on his way. We are about to launch into Reverse Redaction.
Season 2.
Season 2.
Should I just get started?
Here, we'll give him another minute. So, ladies and joims, lords and ladies, we are moving into another... This is our culture-focused and conversation and more open-ended and more ranty side. Less written.
Did you say it's more Randy?
More not Randy. You're the only person in the world that uses Randy as horny. I think that's all the time.
Dude.
What?
Lord, just say Randy. People know what that means.
No, people don't use Randy for...
I guarantee you.
You do. Randy. Can't remember the last time I heard that other than being with you. That was like 20 years ago. 15.
Back when I was talking about being Randy all the time.
All right. Well, this was an interesting.
Oh, there he is.
This was an interesting part of the discussion to jump in on.
So this was kind of spur of the moment. I did not make the decision to actually do this until last minute, and
of course.
Okay, so
all right, you want to get started? Oh,
well,
so
wait. Yeah, one quick question. What are we talking about?
we're gonna figure it out in just a minute, buddy.
Have you seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse?
No, we can't talk about that.
Oh crap! Did you see Upgrade yet?
No, I just assumed we were talking about Endgame or well, no, you haven't seen Endgame. I thought we were talking Game of Thrones or something.
So between all of us, we've seen all of the things that we're talking about. Man, you got to see Upgrade, guys. I do want to do an episode about Upgrade. Here, let's do. Well, there's one thing that we could do, and that was talk about our sign off. So
okay, and then I think we could also talk. We could also talk about Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm ready to have that conversation. Like,
let's do it.
Okay.
So what was the other thing? Talk about your sign off.
Okay, so our sign off up until.
All right, well, let's get started.
Okay, let's get started. You start. Judah's going to be the point man.
All okay. Right. And welcome to another episode of Reverse Redaction. We're back. It's season 2, and I'm joined by Ford, who's a surfing violinist, the bass voice from hell.
Greetings.
And joining a special guest regular today is Randy. I mean, Jared. Jared Putnam.
Yeah, I think we established me as the Lance and Coy Duke of this broadcast, where like Ford dipped out for a while and then I came in. So
that's right.
If anybody gets that Dukes of Hazzard reference.
I don't think anybody will, but
some people will.
Well, we're back at it. It's only been a year, and we took a sabbatical, and we're back talking today. We're going to just kind of refresh ourselves how to get back into this, and talk a little bit about Game of Thrones. There will be some spoilers, spoiler alert, but we will warn you when the spoilers are coming. And but we also, Ford, you wanted to talk about our outro.
Yes. So up until the last episode that I did with you guys was we were saying get to work. There's a lot to build. I would say make your own myth. But Jared didn't have something to say, and I've decided this is a segment in the Surfing Violinist podcast now. Jared, I think your sign off after we say the other two should be the following. You ready?
No, but okay.
So it's going to sound like this. Make your own myth. Get to work. There's a lot to build. Go to hell.
Is that just like a reflection of my personality?
No, it's not. It's just we already had the things set up for us, and I did a whole treatise on what I mean by go to hell, meaning that most of what we talk about is characters in these terrible situations where they have to make a hellacious decision between self-preservation and the survival of the species or something like that. That keeps coming up, like Annihilation. We talked quite a bit about that. So,
right.
That's the suggestion, anyways. So
okay, so
mold that over as we talk about the hell of Game of Thrones.
So, what is your reaction, Jared? How do you feel? We're not gonna make you do this necessarily.
No, I mean, I think I guess my just initial reaction is it's a good first draft. It's a good first draft. Maybe we can tweak it to maybe. What if we take like the pop culture equivalent of hell, and then we tell people to somehow like go there. I don't know. Like this is just kind of
spitballing. What is that? What is the pop culture version of hell?
So I guess my first two thoughts would either be an actual what's the worst place we can think of within a show we liked, or it's just maybe a show that we hated, or a movie that we hated.
Okay, I'm that's possible.
But yeah, maybe we just stick with go to hell. I'm fine with that. These are just like immediate reaction.
Yeah, I mean, if it were Game of Thrones, we could say face your fears beyond the wall or something,
right?
Or, freeze your soul beyond the wall.
Send your Dothraki out in a suicide jar.
There you go. That's perfect. Perfect.
Okay, so what do we land on here? You're gonna say what? Go to hell, and then treatise afterwards about what it means?
No, I don't know. Oh, if we need to do something today, I'll just say go to hell probably.
Okay.
I think it would be just hilarious, like people hearing it for the first time. Like, what does he mean by that? And then they'll have to go look. Like, this guy is so rude. Or I could say it. I mean, hey, I'm usually the villain. So, I mean, let's be honest.
Wait, for all the people that are tuning into our outro that haven't. What do you mean?
Well, somebody discovers it for the first time, and they're like, "Man, what is this podcast about?" And then they get to the end, and the very last thing that the person says is "Go to hell." They would be like, "What?"
And they don't hear this part.
Well, yeah, no. Well, they're going to hear this episode, but these are people who are already listening. There's literally like 3 right now. I don't think we have to worry. I'm talking about the future when we blow up, because it's going to happen, baby.
Oh,
excuse me.
When we blow up.
When we blow up, yeah.
I see. Okay.
Watch your back, Joe Rogan. Coming for you, baby.
Hey, if we get into the intellectual dark web, my life will be complete.
Joe Rogan's good. Joe's a good place to aspire for.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's kind of the king of the hill right now. 1 billion downloads a year, I think, podcast was.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
1 billion. It's just insane.
Yeah.
We're coming for it. We're coming for 10 billion, Joe. 10.
So, that brings me a pop culture discussion topic. So he smokes pot a lot on
live, yeah,
live, and marijuana is about to be legalized. Here in Illinois for sure, and across the United States. What are your guys' feelings? How do you guys feel about marijuana? Because I'm sort of torn.
Right. What you go first, Jared?
Um, I would have to, I guess, go back and look at some of the statistics from Colorado. I kind of had little brief discussions with a friend about this who, you know, he was very pro marijuana, and I just was pretty neutral. And I think kind of coming from a journalism background, just the questions start rolling through my mind about like, okay, well, what's it going to do to certain areas? And I think I saw some statistics from Colorado where accident rates had gone up, like car accident rates. And so I think really the only two questions I would have would be along those lines in terms of like accident rates. And then the other thing I think would be, I don't think we can really know. Well, maybe they've done studies. Maybe the government's done studies about, you know, long-term marijuana usage, or you know, breaking that down into starting at earlier ages and things like that. But you know, I think there's just certain things medically where, you know, if this is sort of the test generation, you're not really going to know what some of the you know, effects may be, even if they're sort of like outlying effects. You know, you may not know until we've kind of gone through all that. But I mean, overall, I'm definitely not like, you know, against it, and I feel like it's inevitable. So I guess I don't really have too strong of a take on it.
Well, I guess my question is not so much how do you feel about it, sort of abstractly.
Oh, okay.
Will you partake? Will you buy it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't clear. And actually, kind of both are important.
Yeah. You know, I think I would be willing to try it. I think it part of me is kind of curious about it. Like I've never, which is interesting because I've never tried a cigarette when I was a kid. I got pneumonia early as a kid and had bronchitis every year after that. And so like every winter I just had some major trouble breathing. And so you know, when you find out about smoking, like, oh yeah, this causes all these lung problems. You know, there was never any interest in me. I'll just look like a dork. You know, it's fine. I'd like to breathe instead. So, and the other thing is
choose life.
Right. And I've never really been like, I'll have a drink, maybe, I mean, literally maybe 2 or 3 times a year. But it never really had an appeal for me either. And it wasn't anything, you know, in terms of religious reasons or anything like that. It's just like, I don't drink Cokes. I don't drink soft drinks. I don't know. I don't really like the taste. I would drink alcohol in a heartbeat before I'd drink a Coke. So a lot of the stuff that, you know, people, you know, enjoy in terms of substances like that, I haven't. But marijuana, there's a little bit of a curiosity. I think it's more of a curiosity in terms of like how it would affect me, or, you know, how you would feel differently. Because I've never really, I've never been drunk. I've never, you know, because I don't like alcohol enough to consume it much, period, much less enough.
Right. So you're going to definitely want to do it in a very small dose in a controlled environment in which you have control of your environment. So,
right.
Right. And by that, he means on this podcast when it happens.
Probably that would be the best time to do it, to be honest.
Georgia will probably be the last one.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know, like unless they do it at a nationwide level, like Georgia will be among like the last 5 probably to do it. So.
Yeah. So
well, there's hope. I'm hoping then that marijuana is what breaks you out of your shell, Sharon.
So surprisingly, I'm the most liberal person here. I've consumed in edible form and smoked at one point. You know, I'm not saying but never. No. This is imaginary.
Was that a coherent?
I have.
Are you eating it right now?
Yeah, probably. No, I'm not. I'm totally not under the influence. And I have drank substantially more in the last 3 years than I ever have before. So I would say that weed. I was a kid when I was growing up, because I used to hang out with potheads who surfed, and I was always impressed by how adept they were. They could surf while they were high, and That was not my experience. Okay, I thought I was talking to like aliens. So when I ate a pot cookie or pot brownie, so
And how old were you at this time?
I'm not at liberty to say. It's been a couple years.
Oh,
But
oh,
yeah.
right. Okay.
So
But you weren't
Oh.
a kid, a little kid.
no, I wasn't a little kid.
Okay,
So-
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that was just the confusion there. And then you
Oh,
said
no, when I was
something-
in high school, I didn't. Because
Okay.
I was a teetotaling goody. I never drank beer, never smoked.
Yeah.
I smoke pretty regularly now, not weed, but just cigarettes, just as a social thing. So just because guys, that you take a smoke break, and
Yeah.
and doing manual labor, like I understand when people do it now. I get it. I finally get it. Like it makes sense. You're like, ah. So you're like, well, my body's being destroyed. I'm just gonna add to it. I don't know. It's almost just like it's just like taking a break, taking a breath, and
So
there's
I
a
find
social
that-
aspect to it.
I find that interesting because so had you ever smoked a cigarette prior to this job?
The only time I smoked a cigarette was in preparation for a film role. It was that one independent film I was in before we went to India, and so the character was supposed to smoke unfiltered Camels. So
Wow.
I bought unfiltered Camels, and my mom taught me how to smoke on the porch.
Wow.
I was 20.
Wow.
Let's see, how old was I at that point? I was 30. My mom was teaching me how to smoke.
Your mom taught
Yeah.
you how to smoke.
Yeah, so I was like,
Wow.
so
Interesting.
My-
because I was trying. I was trying to like hold it so I didn't look like some little dweeb.
Mhm.
Hey guys, I'm smoking a cigarette. Hey cool kids, that's Steve Buscemi meme. Hey cool kids,
Well-
I'm smoking a cigarette.
And it was.
My,
Go ahead.
go ahead. Well, my brother taught me how to smoke. I was kind of a prude as a kid too. My brother was the opposite. He was sort of the rebel, and he let me know that you're supposed to inhale it. I was just like, I don't know what's so cool about this, guys, and I was like blowing it,
Right.
And we're in a car, and he's like, dude, you're supposed to like suck it in, like into your lungs. And I was like, oh, and I'm like, I'm very affected by substances like,
Right.
and I was just like, whoa.
I know, right? See, that's what happened to me with the pot brownie thing. Like I had it after I'd had, like, we were on a big weekend party deal, and I had a lot of whiskey, and I'd smoked a cigar before that. So that pot brownie just like it ended me, dude. I was having a conversation with the transcendent reality in the bathroom, and
Wow.
I was trying to take a crap, but I was constipated. Here's some more information for you. Well, you're familiar with this, Jared. So, anyways, I was.
Wait. What?
You've done this a couple times.
We were roommates in college, and I was always like having intestinal issues.
But that was a very specific story, and then to just throw in that I'm familiar with this, I needed to be like, whoa.
you know, Jared, constipation.
No, it was almost like I was there or something, or like I had told him that specific story myself somehow. Like, one time.
I was so high, like it just teleported you to me, so you got to see me constipate. But anyways, so yeah, there's too much digestive information with Ford. So I was sitting on the toilet, and it felt like I was there for 5 hours. And
Wow.
and I walked to the sink, and I felt so bad. I sat on the floor, and the room elongated, and it looked like I was in a warehouse. And I was looking at what I thought was a light, like at the other end of the warehouse, and it was the shower head.
Wow.
And I got back up. I don't know. Maybe they put something else in these brownies other than just. But I hear that when you consume it in that form, that it has more of an effect than just smoking.
It's more potent.
Have you ever listened to Rogan's stuff about
DMT and all that?
Yeah,
DMT.
because that's what this
Okay,
what this
no,
sounds
but
like.
yeah. So I stood up. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I talked to God, and I was speaking for God. But I was asking myself a series of questions, and I had the answer. It was like that time I had that dream.
I was gonna say you've never needed any kind of substance to do that. I mean, just like in the middle of the night. I don't know if Judah knows this story.
Tell
I can
that
tell
story.
it. I
Tell
can
that
tell it after. Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
You
I'll
finish.
finish this one. So
Yeah.
I was looking in the mirror, And they're so weird. So earlier in that day, we stopped at a gas station, and I went in to take a piss, and the other toilet was out of order. Or maybe it was one of those doors you're supposed to lock, but I didn't lock it. And the dude walked in, and he's like, "Oh, hey." I was like, "Oh, man, I'm sorry, dude." He's like, no problem, man. I would have just taken a piss in the sink. Like, I don't care." And I could tell, like, the dude was so hungover. And for some reason, when I walked out, I was just like, that's a person I just walked past. Again, like what we were talking about earlier, Judah, like, that's a person I walk past every day and just never even notice. Just a working class stiff, and he's just drinking to escape everything, you know. And I felt like, I don't know, I noticed him. You know, we would normally just avoid each other. It's like, oh, look at this preppy city kid. No, look at this weirdo. You know, it's just we wouldn't pay attention to each other. And so that's what popped up in my head when I was having this conversation with quote unquote God, and it was like, you noticed that guy, right? Well, this is what he goes through this to escape the feeling of reality. Like, he's willing to go this far to feel what you're feeling right now, which to you is hell. He comes here willingly and has fun doing it. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it, cool. And it's like, and then I asked myself, so how long have you been in here? It's like, 3 hours. Just look at the clock when you leave. Okay, just tell me you're gonna look at the clock when you leave. I'll look at the clock when I leave. Don't forget, you're gonna forget. Don't forget, look at the clock when you leave. I will look at the clock when I leave. I walked out the door. It had been 21 minutes.
Wow.
So that's my experience with marijuana right there. So,
well, the thing is marijuana is more potent when you consume it, is because usually people will eat more and more thinking nothing's going on. It's not actually more potent.
That's a good point.
As like in its that form. It's just you consume so much more, and you're like, oh, this is good.
Dude, there's some classic things on the internet. You can look up on YouTube, like the cop who ate it, and he calls 911. He's like, I'm dying. Me and my wife are dying.
I've heard it.
Sir,
yeah.
I wonder if there's like a conversion chart of how much. Yeah, of like how much, you know, eating. Of course, I guess maybe it could vary a lot with eating, like depending on how much you would put into it versus, you know, how much it would take to get that smoking.
Well, it's the same thing with alcohol. I mean, there are times, like, I'm still a real lightweight when it comes to substances. There are times like I will walk over to we play gigs usually on Friday nights at Los Antijitos, a local restaurant bar, Mexican place, and they have margaritas. And so the 3 band members, we got margaritas one night. We took one sip of that and was like, it's like straight tequila. I'm like, did you put anything else in this? It was like a whole cup, you know? And like we were so trashed by like the 3rd sip. And I was like, what is wrong with me? But sometimes if you haven't eaten all day, like it can go straight to your brain. And I'll tell you right now, though. I'll tell you right now, that set was killer. We slayed it. Yes.
Oh, so I've got to go back, rewind a little bit and tell this quick. It's just a very quick story about Ford. This is good. So and so for anybody else who doesn't know, so Ford and I were roommates our senior year of college, and so one night he was on the top bunk, I was on the bottom bunk, and one night I wake up to talking, and so I think at first I just woke up and it kept going on for a second, and I'm like, are you talking to me? And so I got up, or wait, maybe was it bunk beds? Yeah, it was bunk beds.
You were on top. I was on.
No,
I was on top. Yeah,
you're on top. So I had to actually get out of bed to look at him to see like what was going on. And so he's sitting up in bed, talking to himself. And so we're pre like Bluetooth and all this. So this was 2003 or so. So we don't have anything like that going on. It wasn't Bluetooth. He's talking to himself, and I'm like, but it was mumbling. It was just mumbling gibberish, and so I'm like, Ford, are you talking to me? So he looks over. This is like horror movie setting at this point. It's pretty creepy. So he looks over at me, but he's not really like looking at me. It's almost kind of like looking through me. And he goes, but I don't have all the answers. And then in a whispered voice says, yes, I do. and then throws himself back down in bed, like throws himself back down and back asleep. So it was, but I don't have all the answers. Yes, I do.
We just found our outro.
So I'm pretty sure. Oh, right, yeah, no, that's it. That needs to be it. So needless to say, like, I didn't really get a lot of quality sleep the rest of the night. So
Yeah, that's been my struggle. See, I have my shadow self is very close to being in control, Gina,
Yeah.
so I definitely have to go to hell to wrestle with him.
So yeah, so that's
Oh,
why
man.
I said like he doesn't need any kind of substance to have that. Just take like a power nap.
Well, it is interesting. I think the three of us, and I think having gone through high school mostly, so definitely Jared, not influenced by any substance. I'm hearing a little echo, Ford.
Oh,
You got,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
sorry. Maybe it's helped us be more creative. Maybe it's helped us get in touch with our, like that side of us that is creative. That that high, the healthy high, that part of us that shoots endomorphins or what are they called? Endomorphins, right? Into our brain.
Endorphins.
Endorphins. Endo-powered.
It shoots.
Yeah.
It shoots. People into your brains. Endomorphs.
Endomorphins.
Endomorphin Power Rangers.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what Power Rangers have. Endomorphins.
Yeah, that's right. Endorphins. So yeah, endorphin, serotonin gets pumped into our brains in creative situations.
Yeah.
A lot of times. And I wonder if we've been able to, because a lot of my friends, I wouldn't say a lot, but I think the friends that experience more like drugs and stuff as alcohol and drugs as in high school, it seems to be a little difference there.
How so?
Well, I had one experience where I had this discussion with a friend, and he felt like he had to get high. He got high and had to, and he was fascinated by by my ability to just sort of my inhibition, be able to go, in this imaginary land. It was like this. It was a guy at Tacoma Falls, actually. I don't want to say his name, but it was at Tacoma Falls. Able to sort of explore these ideas and this creative discussion we were having without that, and I didn't really understand at all why anybody would need a substance. Now I kind of understand it,
Right.
But now I kind of see it as a hindrance to that sometimes.
Well, yeah, I think one of the problems is like once you get dependent on it, and I think that's one of the things in the first hour is really trying to get across. And the Surfing Violinist podcast, what I want to do is to learn how to not be dependent on things. We talk about being dependent on other people or social structures or the government or religion or whatever, but there's a lot of things that we're dependent on, like endorphin wise or chemical wise, and of course, we know with addictions and whether it be coffee or sugar, like we're so dependent that you can't be independent when you're dependent. You're kind of bringing to Game of Thrones. This is how Littlefinger is able to, in those early seasons, able to play so many people against each other, because he knows what makes them tick. He knows what they're dependent on. He knows their ultimate need. Robert needs women and wine. Tyrion needs women and wine. So he can play people off of, because he knows how long they're going to go before they have to come back to the watering hole, so to speak. And then he can pounce on them.
That's a good point.
So I think, and he even mentions that real explicitly in the book. It's like that's how you win in the Game of Thrones, is by knowing people's weaknesses. And I think that's what one of the whole I guess goals for me is to, kind of like we said earlier, Judo, about how we don't make excuses for our past failings or what has become a habit in our life. It's like, I'm just a messy person, or I'm just a lazy person, or I'm just a procrastinator. It's like, yeah, everyone is that. I mean, But
we don't lean on the crutch of
right,
label.
the crutch. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good way to put it. The crutch.
And for those of you who are just tuning in, Ford's talking about his podcast, The Surfing Violinist. Tune in on iTunes or an hour before we do this one.
So, okay.
All right, well, but the flip side of that, we only have a little bit of time left.
Okay.
The flip side of being dependent on a drug, right, not being able to tap into certain things because of that dependence is Abraham Lincoln's quote. Have you ever heard his quote about vices? It has been my experience that folks who have no vices have very few virtues.
Yeah, see, I like that. Is fantastic. I need to plagiarize that one, because here's one of the things I think about whenever I've gone on diets or fasts or these kind of things. What's his name? Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, and the idea is that's why I use the word robust in the surfing violinist thing, is because if you are not accustomed to dealing with certain chemicals, let's say, or certain things that you might eat, then when you do consume those things, they knock you on your ass. So it's like you need to be able to have a broad range of experience, or you end up being dependent on your lack of involvement. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of insulates you from certain people that you couldn't hang out with. Like, for instance, I'm lactose intolerant since I came back from India. I got real sick. And I would come back. At first, I just wouldn't eat pizza. And then over time, I was like, you know what? I want to hang out with these pizza people. I want to hang out with these pizzas. I do want to hang out with the pizzas. But I want to hang out with these people, and they're eating pizza. And so I ate the pizza as a social thing. And over time, some dietary restrictions you can't obviously do this with. But over time, I've just dealt with it. Like, I've suffered the consequences for the social interaction. And I actually find that psychologically it's better for me, believe it or not.
What about you, Jared? Like, do you take affront at this quote? Because you're a man of very few vices.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of sort of, I think vices come in a lot of forms. So I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think I just don't fall into the kind of the typical ones, because the ones that, people typically think of as alcohol or specific substances. So,
right.
So no, I don't take any affront to it, because I don't think it's necessarily even true of me. But I mean, even if I had none, I think there is probably some truth to that. I think a lot of times, you can have. Now, tell me the quote again exactly.
The quote was, my experience is that folks who have no vices have very few virtues.
Yeah.
So the way I interpret it, I guess what it speaks to me is those that battle vices,
Yeah.
Those that battle vices find that crucible between the vice and the virtue, right? They find virtue in between vice and what would be the other thing, between vice and just, normal life.
Well, I think that word incarnation is actually pretty good. Like, living in a thing, but not being mastered by it, being able to be, and like, that was what happened to me with that time when I met that one dude with the hangover. And then later on the experience at night, it's like, this is a person, and I just walk right past him. I don't even see that he exists, because he's living in a different area. But if I were to go and like sit in a bar and try to talk to him, like, this dude would be like, get away, man. Like, because I can't speak his language, And so I think, sharing a vice with somebody, even if you're not like fully committed. That's why I like that scene in Band of Brothers. There's a scene where Winters, who's a Quaker, or he's not really a Quaker, but that's what they call him. But religious guy, and he was teetotaler. He comes up and they offer him, some whiskey or something, and he grabs it, takes one sip, and it's apparent what he's doing there. It's like identification with the group. He's not. He doesn't. he's not just trying to sell out. He's trying to say, hey, I'm not above you guys. Like, we're in this together. And they that was good for them. Like, they weren't trying to get like, oh, we're gonna see him sloshing drunk. It was just like, okay, well, now we know you're on our team. You know what I mean? It's just, And he told one of the things that has been sticking with me, and I keep trying to remember it because I do a little bit of managing people. I mean, just a little bit, and I try to remember this. There was one of his subordinates who was above other guys. They were playing a game of darts, and the guy ended up winning, the guy who had the more power, and he pulled him aside after the game of darts and was like, hey, you should have lost that game. He's like, what? I was just playing darts, man. He's like, I don't want you to take anything away from these men. Don't take anything away from these men. And I just thought that was like, wow, that's really humbling, you know, because that's what a leader really, truly, in the old sense of the word, the nobility, they had the noblesse oblige, you know, they had this obligation to serve the people that were supposedly under them. It was truly supposed to be servant leadership. The king was at the front line of the battle, you know, like in those Shakespearean dramas, King Henry. Like, he ain't sitting at the back. He ain't sitting there pressing buttons. He's at the front with, you know, with the banner, like at the front of the battle. And that's the sort of sentiment that I think you kind of need in dealing with these people that are different than you. And so you have to be willing to be on their level, I guess, you know, and it's just more about dignifying their experience, not like, oh, I'm one of you too. Again, you don't want to be like the Steve Buscemi meme, like, hey, cool kids, I'm a skateboarder. Like, but
and I wonder if you know, there's a lot of ways to kind of interpret that quote,
right.
And I'm now curious to research it a little bit more. But just a couple of you know, things I was thinking of is I wonder, you know, I think the people who do have vices a lot of times maybe. I wonder if you know, maybe sometimes they're more inclined to be understanding of other people, have more empathy, or maybe even if they feel like they need to, you know, make up for it in some way, if there's some sort of meaning towards that. But the other thing is, the thing I kind of, I guess, think of about that is, you know, I know a lot of people within the church who, you know, sort of, you know, growing up in the Bible Belt and Southern Baptist churches, specifically, you know, people who define their goodness by not doing things like that.
A lack of vices, yeah.
A lack of vices, yeah. And you know, and I get, you know, when I was a kid, that was all I really knew, and like, oh yeah, that's how you, you know, sort of be a good person or whatever. And
right.
And as I've gotten older, I guess I've kind of, you know, gone more to the side of what you're talking about, where, you know, seems to me like, you know, more of the better people I know, you know, maybe have some sort of vice or you know, just flaws in general or something like that. But they seem to just be more like fully formed and better people in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think the difference between prudence and like and being a prude is like in one case you're not afraid to have contact with it. You know, being prudent means that you're just, you know, okay, I can't go beyond this many drinks, or I turn into a raging monster. You know, different people, it affects different ways. You know, but like knowing how to dance through an array of different vices or virtues, right? And whereas a prude is just like, oh, everything is repugnant to me, and I'm just not going to, you know.
But I think also with our human experience, one thing my father taught me is, my dad was an artist, and when he taught me to draw, when he taught me to paint, he impressed upon me the importance of having dark next to white. He said, if you want this white to really be white, you got to contrast it. You got to have the darkness next to it.
Well,
if you just keep everything sort of pallid, you know, sort of this, you know, this it's just like all sort of one color. And the same thing with music later when he was talking about music, piano forte. You know, the real beauty, the real soft. You really understand softness. You really understand light next to the darkness, next to the loud.
Well, and we understand that from cinema. I mean, if you want flat lighting, you go to a soap opera. And it's kind of ironic, like a soap opera, which has the worst storytelling and the most melodrama, is so evenly lit. And then and flat, and then cinema usually tries to employ gradation. Like that you can
Well,
contrast.
and within story, there's the quote that really kind of applies to story, if not literally too. It's always darkest before the dawn,
Right, yep.
because you've been in darkness longer. That's what you've been used to.
Yep.
And then then when the light comes, there's a greater contrast. So.
Definitely. Well, maybe that could be a good segue into next week when we can talk about Game of Thrones.
Okay.
The
there it
battle
is.
between ice and fire.
Well, I think so now how do we bring this? How do we make this useful? I think the thing that comes to my mind is the necessity to not just have white and to not just have dark, and to not just have loud, not just quiet, but have a mixture. And in the adventure of life, we have to have, when it comes to vices, when it comes to the uglier side of life, we have to. I think it's important to at least dip our toes in these things, experience-wise, in some fashion. I don't know. What do you guys think? Like I don't think you have to have a vice per se, but I think, like you were saying, Ford, like just taking a sip or somehow being able to engage with it so that it's not other.
Right, and so that it doesn't shock your system. I think that's the thing. If you're remaining aloof, then it is impossible to really get on people's level. And so I think you do have to have interaction. That doesn't mean you necessarily agree. And this is one of the things where we start self-segregating. We self-segregate politically, culturally, linguistically, racially, nationally, and then what ends up happening is that becomes like a foreign agent. And then we don't know what to do. Well, that person, I can't understand him, blah, blah, blah. And our bodies do the same thing with substances, So I think a more robust strategy of dealing with the world is better. You don't want to just have this one note, well, I only drink this, and that's why I'm just not a big fan of the diet stuff, because it's just like, that's why we like watching, we watched Top Chef and we watched Anthony Bourdain when he was around. It's just there's a joy de vivre, just an embracing of the good wherever it comes from.
Yeah. A lot of it, I think, comes down to just people's identity. Like what you're saying with how we segregate ourselves and things like that. And, you see it a lot, of course, politically now today, how people define themselves. So that's a whole other, that's a rabbit hole that I could go down. But yeah, I don't know.
Do you think there's a correlation though between living robustly, like dabbling in, not making sure? So is there a correlation between prudeness and segregation?
Okay, well, I would say, I've been listening to some Epictetus. He's was a Greek philosopher, the Stoics. And I think what we have to be able to do is to dance between Epicurean approach to life, which is like, let's just embrace everything, this Dionysian, raucous love of dopamine, or the Stoic version, which is like nothing. Like you just put your head down, do what you need to do. You don't need to worry about emotion. Don't let it taint you. And I think you have to dance between both of those. There are times for both philosophies. Multiple points of the day. There's a time to say no. No, I'm not smoking that. And then there are other times where it's like you got to get off your high horse and be a human being and quit trying to pretend to be an angel, or a robot. Or whatever, a demigod. I think you need both strategies, though. Yeah.
You had a thought, Jared. What were you gonna say?
I think my thought or question would be, how individual or how subjective and individual do you think this needs to be? Because people are, some people are always going to be much better than others at self-regulating.
Right.
So, Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you have an answer or a thought on that, Ford, but, because kind of what you're talking about, I think is very, applicable to some people, but, for some people, who maybe are bad at self-regulating, it just seems like it's going to be a very varied spectrum.
Well, I think it is a very varied spectrum, but you don't want to defer that right to somebody else who's going to make the decisions for an adult. So it comes down to, I think it comes down to those people. A lot of people self-medicate with some of these things because they don't see they're in the fog. They don't see another way out, and so whatever their addiction is, it's just convenient, and it numbs them to having to deal with whatever. And if they see a better example, if they see someone that's with them that's like, oh wow, man, that guy doesn't wake up with a headache every day, then they're like, man, I would like to wake up with no headache tomorrow. So like that's just a better example of how to change their situation than some other person outside saying, hey, you're on the one hand, like the religion, like you're going to hell if you don't change that, or we're going to throw you in prison if you don't change this. Like, and I think it's 2019. Like these are not new problems. I mean, people have been addicted to things for eternity, and we have a lot of new addiction options, but I don't think we want anybody telling us, well, you can only use your phone 5 minutes a day or whatever,
No, right. No, I agree.
But yeah,
Well,
trying to figure out how to do that, trying to get people to walk out the door themselves, if they're imprisoned in their own vice, like, yeah, I think that takes a lot of interpersonal reaction, living.
Well, interpersonal, I think, is the key there. Interpersonal, because you're talking about personal versus, or how individual this is, right, Jared? And I think on our own, we will give in to the vices.
Yeah.
We need others to hold, the accountability within ourselves and the accountability of other people. I'm not talking about like an accountability meeting or whatever, but the relationship, the stakes of being in a relationship being more powerful than the rules and outside coercion of religion.
Yeah. I think that's good.
But you're assuming that I guess I'm not entirely clear what you mean, but you're saying that the relationship will help keep each person accountable?
Well, I think they've done that study with rats, with the ones that were like addicted to some substance, and when they're alone, I can't remember the particulars. Do you remember that study that I'm talking about? It's like when they're alone, they could not wean themselves off, but if they had access to actual food and they were in a social setting, they would quit going to the dopamine fixation. So I think community does help provide people a way out, but it has to be real community.
Yes.
And part of the problem is so many of these communities are facsimile communities, or they're social clubs that require some sort of arbitrary sacrifice or something like that, or so it is. Yeah, it is tough. It's tough figuring out how to tread that line of encouraging the dependent individual to become independent.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're out of time. I think it started broad and it ended, I think, very complex. And I appreciate your guys' input on this. So I'm going to.
Next week, do you want to catch up with the battle for Winterfell, Judah, and we can have a conversation about that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, and then that'll give me one more week to catch up with Endgame, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there will be another Game of Thrones episode.
Yeah, so we'll have more fodder to talk about for next week, because maybe some things will be a little bit clarified. That's what we're kind of hoping for, I think, at this point.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well.
All right.
What was I supposed to say?
Oh.
I had mine ready.
He's
to go.
ready, man. He's going.
All right, Ford, start us off. Or end us off.
Make your own. Oh, wait. Am I starting? Make your own myth. Let's try it again. Make your own myth.
Get to work. There's a lot to build.
Go to hell.